Hi, I'm Kelly Hushin, and I am here with Joseph Richardson from FMC Technologies. We are here at ProcureCon 2010 in Dallas, and you were just sitting in on a panel, you said, right? It was which one?
Change management.
Change management. You said it was kind of interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Excuse me. When you ask the question about change management and what does it mean, if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers. So, particularly when you have a diverse organization where you have different geographies, different countries, change management for one segment of your company may be totally different from the other segment as well.
How do you deal with that cross-company?
Well, there are several elements that you have to consider. People, process, and technology, technical, political, and cultural aspects of your business. Because I believe that the political environment really drives the culture, and the culture really drives the people.
Right, right. So it's a big issue, I assume, for a lot of corporations like yours.
It is. Particularly if you look at change management in terms of what the definition is, it's really a change of the roles, responsibilities of the people who are involved in the company. Excuse me. And understanding what those roles and responsibilities are in relationship to the deliverables that they have to deliver. So properly preparing them for those new roles is something that change management should be all about.
Right. So just to kind of go back and get a little bit of your background and what you do, can you talk a little bit about your role at FMC, what FMC is, and what you do there?
FMC is an oil and gas service company, and we service all of the major oil companies and the independents. There are two segments of energy systems, which is part of what I work for as far as FMC is concerned. There's oil extraction from the surface of the earth, and then there's subsea, which is at the bottom of the ocean. And so our company, FMC Technologies, does both surface extraction as well as subsea. We manufacture oil and gas drilling and processing equipment. One of our separators that we currently are making and designing and developing for one of our major customers will actually sit on the bottom of the ocean. It drills into the subsea itself, the surface of the ocean itself, and we actually extract oil and gas from the bottom of the ocean.
Wow.
And our equipment actually separates the oil and the gas and sends the oil in one direction, the gas in another direction. And then, of course, you can imagine you have sand and seawater from the indigenous environment of the sea.
Right.
And it allows for us to purify that sand, purify the water, and return it to that indigenous environment.
Interesting. Wow.
So that's the equipment that we as a company manufacture.
Right, and now you head up global sourcing, right?
Yes, I do.
So what does that entail, and just talk a little bit about that role.
Global sourcing, as far as FMC is concerned, is really taking full advantage of the tactical and strategic initiatives within the company having to do with supply chain. And when you say supply chain, we kind of look at it a little differently because every element of the company is part of the supply chain at one point or another. And so decisions that are made, we want to make sure that we're making the right decisions for the right reasons. And so that really includes both strategic and tactical relationships that we have with our suppliers. And we typically look at suppliers that have the capability of handling our global requirements. Although there is a certain degree of sourcing that takes place locally to support the local markets for our different sites as well.
Okay. So now talking a little bit about how your team gets closer to other teams internally, I'm curious to know if you at FMC are taking any initiatives to bring procurement closer to, let's say, sales or marketing team, and why, if so?
Very good question. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, that if you look at the organizational structure, every department within the organization is part of the supply chain. Even when you look at HR provides the resources to populate the open requisitions, so they're part of the supply chain. Engineering designs the products, and therefore they're part of the supply chain. Sales and marketing sells the products that engineering designs, so they're part of the supply chain. So when you look at all of the other elements and you look at the supply chain holistically, it's a lot different than looking at sourcing and procurement, which is an element of the supply chain. So as a company, we try to look at things holistically so that we look at the different roles and responsibilities of the marketing and sales organization and how that really plays into their customer base. And then the roles and responsibilities that we hold our suppliers accountable for, and how that really fits into the overall scheme of things and how that really plays into the overall customer requirements. So working collaboratively together will allow for us to meet the customer requirements as well as establishing meaningful relationships with our strategic suppliers.
Right. What about other internal teams like R&D? Are you guys doing anything to bring procurement closer to R&D and to interact more with that department? Are there any efforts being made there?
That's a very interesting question. We do a fair amount of that with our core technology group. The core technology group is our technical arm that's responsible for looking at technology today, but also advancing it into tomorrow and what our expectations, roles, and responsibilities will be for tomorrow. But equally as importantly is looking at our suppliers, and we want to influence their research and development. We want to influence their capitalization and how that really could play into the overall research and development of our company. Looking at technology alignment between our strategic suppliers and the technology alignment of our core technology group is really very important in moving forward. So yes, we do take that very much in consideration.
Right. I was going to ask you, about some initiatives moving forward. That's a good one to mention. Are there any other initiatives that FMC is taking as a global company, or just within the procurement arm of it? Can you talk about some new things that are sort of up and coming?
We have some very strategic relationships with some of our suppliers, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and we are looking at working jointly with them so that we can develop the next generation of product line. And so working very closely between their engineering personnel and our technical personnel to look at the state of the art and to move that forward is something that we're involved with now with some of our strategic suppliers. I can't mention specifically what they are doing because of competition and we certainly don't want to give up any of our secrets. However, I can assure you that we are working very diligently with our strategic suppliers so that we can ensure that we are aligned with the technical direction that we believe will give our companies a competitive advantage.
Right. Going back to the internal teams discussion, such as sales and marketing, R&D, those kinds of organizations within the company as a whole, what are some of the challenges that procurement might face in trying to kind of bring all of those teams together and benefit more from each other as opposed to just keeping, procurement kind of siloed?
One of the largest challenges I think we have is really understanding the significance of some of these teams and how our cross-functional teams and cross-organizational teams would really play into that. Trying to harness that is very, very difficult. And so particularly when you're looking at 5 different geographies, you have a certain degree of individuation and the individual sites themselves and the teams that exist or coexist within those sites. And then you have other corporate initiatives. So tying all of those things together is quite a challenge. And we are still in the process now of getting our arms around it. And many times when you look at cross-functional teams, sometimes you have people within the procurement community that believe that they have cross-functional teams. Well, what they really mean is they have cross-organizational teams, not necessarily cross-functional teams. Cross-functional teams would include various functions within the enterprise.
Okay.
And that would include a technical component, commercial component, quality, various engineering, product engineering, design engineering, having, and finance, having these folks together with the sales and marketing representation would truly give you a cross-functional team. It gives you the degree of diversity that you really need if you look at things holistically to solve a multitude of issues and challenges. So that to us is very important, and that's what we're striving to develop.
Now this may be a tough one, but because you guys are still kind of grappling with these issues and trying to wrap your heads around it, like you said, but how can you measure the effectiveness of, let's say, bringing procurement in earlier in the discussion for, let's say, R&D or sales and marketing, bringing them in and saying, okay, well, we all need to kind of sit down and we all need to brainstorm together. Procurement can't be left out of this. How do you measure whether that's even effective?
Well, that's a great question, but looking at things holistically, going back to what I had said a little bit earlier, looking at the supply chain, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So when you talk about having a supply chain group together, you're talking about those different departments, which I think is very important. If you're only talking about sourcing and procurement, and you're excluding all of the other departments, then you have a very myopic approach to the decision-making process. But having an integrated approach where you include sourcing, procurement, and some of the other elements as well, like engineering, sales, marketing, quality, these are all the different functions within the organizational structure that should be included in that team atmosphere as well. And sometimes when you ask the question, what do you mean by supply chain? Answering the question holistically, that actually it's the entire company that's part of the supply chain, but there are virtual roles and responsibilities that each of us will have at various stages of the process. If you look at sourcing and procurement, if you ask the question, is it a function? Is it a strategy? Is it a process? Is it a practice? If you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers, maybe even 20 or 30. But the real answer, I believe, it's all of those things.
Right.
It is a process, it is a strategy, it is a practice, and it is a function. And learning how we can coexist together with the other parts of the organization, I think is really truly the challenge that we're going to be facing, along with some of the other best practice companies will be facing as we get into 2011 and beyond.
Right. Well, you kind of answered my last question then, which was going to be, what are some of the biggest challenges you see heading out to 2011 and beyond? So I think you've covered it. Is there anything else that you could note as sort of a challenge that you foresee in a procurement organization like yours?
I do, because I look at the engineering community, and if you ask engineering if they're part of the supply chain, they're going to say no. That's a purchasing thing. When you look at sales and marketing, they will say the same thing. If you look at some of the other functions, they believe that sourcing procurement is supply chain when it's not. And when we start thinking outside of the box and we really look at the supply chain as the enterprise, and then looking for the enablers within the enterprise that allows for us to coexist, and to look at things not myopically by this is sourcing and procurement, and this is quality, and this is engineering, but looking at it in terms of this cross-fertilization is really going to look out for the best interest of the organizational structure itself. So I think once we start looking at things holistically, we will certainly be able to be more successful.
Right. Well, good luck with that, and I'm sure that a lot of people here are probably thinking in the same way, or else they wouldn't be, so interested in this education that they're getting at ProcureCon. But thank you so much for sitting down and chatting about these topics, and I hope that the rest of the conference goes well for you, and we'll have to check back in and see.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.